The rain had been falling since dawn, thin and steady, a gray curtain over the glass walls of the apartment. Boxes lined the hallway. Papers lay scattered across the kitchen table waiting for one last signature. Isla Vance sat alone, pen in hand, staring at the divorce papers. Her name looked strange next to Damien Vale, the letters neat, detached, final. She thought a person's whole life shouldn't fit inside a line that short. The lawyer had said it was only a formality. Once you sign, everything you owned together dissolves, he told her. As if marriage were soap. She pressed the pen to the paper but her hand shook. For a moment she saw Damien's face as it had been in the beginning. Smiling, gentle, eyes bright with plans. Then she remembered the cold, clipped man who'd left for business at midnight and returned with blood on his cuff once, saying it was wine. She signed. The ink bled slightly on the thick paper. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister Lena. "Did you do it?" Isla typed back, "It's done." A single tear slid down before she could stop it. She wiped it away impatiently and pushed the papers aside. On the counter sat a folded sheet of cream stationery, the letter she'd been writing all morning. "Damien, if you ever read this, it means I've finally found the courage to leave. I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye face to face. I'm sorry for everything we became. I loved you. I still do in some ruined way. But I can't keep living afraid of who you are, or what you might do next." Her handwriting blurred halfway through the next line. She set down the pen, pressing a palm to her stomach. A dull nausea rolled through her, familiar now. She'd known for 3 weeks but hadn't told anyone. She whispered to the empty room, "I can't let him find out." The thought filled her with both relief and guilt. Damien wanted control over everything. If he knew she was pregnant, he'd never let her go. The child would be another chain. The doorbell rang, sharp against the steady rain. She froze. For a heartbeat she thought it might be him back early. But it was only the driver the lawyer had sent. "To take the documents," the man explained through the speaker. She handed him the envelope with a tight smile and closed the door quickly. Then she leaned against it, breathing hard. Freedom felt nothing like she'd imagined. Felt hollow, cold, and dangerous. She went back to the table, looked at the letter again and folded it once. She hesitated, then tore it neatly down the middle. Paper whispered as she ripped it again and again until it was a handful of white confetti in the trash. No goodbyes. No trace. That night she packed a single suitcase. Jeans, t-shirts, her grandmother's pendant. Before dawn she'd be gone. But memories wouldn't stay packed. Damien's voice lingered. "You're safe with me, Isla. Always." She used to believe him. When she finally lay down, exhaustion pressing her eyes shut, she dreamed of a heartbeat that wasn't hers, and a shadow that would never stop looking. The next morning's sky was pale and empty, the city muted after the storm. Isla slipped out through the basement garage with a borrowed car key from Lena. A gray sedan waited, the kind no one notices. Lena met her there, hair tied back, face tight with worry. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Isla nodded. "It's the only way." Lena bit her lip. "I can get you a new ID, but it'll take a few days. Lay low at the cabin until then. Don't call me unless it's life or death." "I know." Isla's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she hugged her sister. "Thank you." "Just don't trust anyone," Lena whispered. "Damien has eyes everywhere." At that, Isla almost laughed, a small broken sound. "He always did." They parted quickly. Isla drove without music, the city shrinking in her rearview mirror. Highways unspooled ahead, gray ribbon endless. Every time a black car appeared behind her, her pulse spiked. Every time she passed a gas station security camera, she turned her face away. By dusk she reached the cabin. It was nothing more than a shack near an overgrown lake, left from their parents' camping days. The roof leaked, the air smelled of pine and dust, but it was far enough from anyone who might care. Inside she collapsed onto the old couch. The silence pressed heavy around her. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach. "Hey little one," she murmured. "It's just us now. You and me." For the first time that day she smiled. Meanwhile, in another city, Damien Vale stood in his office staring at the message his assistant had just delivered. "Your wife's car was found on the bridge." He read the sentence twice, unmoving. "Call the Coast Guard," he ordered. "And shut down every news outlet that tries to print it." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, they found her purse in the river." "Find her," Damien snapped, voice like glass. Alive. When the man left, Damien crossed to the window. Outside, the skyline glittered, a cage of light. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. She wouldn't leave me, he whispered to the glass. She wouldn't. But a flicker of doubt slid through him, sharp as a blade. Back at the cabin, Isla watched the news on a flickering old TV. A headline scrolled, Heiress Isla Vance Vale presumed dead after bridge accident. Her heart twisted, but she kept her face blank. It was working. The world would think she was gone. Damien would mourn or rage, but he'd stop looking eventually. He had to. Outside, frogs sang by the water. Inside, she tore the TV cord from the wall and sat in the dark. Days turned to weeks. Lena's contact brought her a new passport, new birth certificate, a new name, Clara Whitmore. It felt strange on her tongue but safe. Safe enough to breathe again. When she finally left the cabin, she wore her hair dyed a softer brown and sunglasses that hid her eyes. The morning air smelled of rain and pine. She drove east, away from everything she'd known. As the sun rose, she whispered to the seat beside her, "No more fear. We start over." The tiny flutter inside her answered, faint but real, and for the first time she believed it. Weeks later, Damien sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a sealed envelope his investigator had found among Isla's belongings. No return address. His name on the front in her handwriting. He tore it open, but inside there was only half a page, words cut off mid-sentence. "If you ever read this, it means I've finally found the courage to..." Nothing more. He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. Somewhere, deep down, a voice he refused to listen to whispered that she might still be alive. He whispered back, "Then I'll find you." Isla's new life began quietly in a coastal town 3 states away. She rented a small apartment near a bookstore, took work as an assistant teacher, and learned to smile again without looking over her shoulder. At night she kept the lights low and the windows locked. Each time she felt her child move inside her, she pressed a hand to her belly and promised, "Nobody will ever hurt you. Not even him." The ocean outside her window answered with its endless, steady breath. 7 years later. The air in the coastal town always smelled faintly of salt and baked bread from the cafe across the street. The mornings began quietly, gulls crying, the sound of waves breaking, a rhythm Isla had learned to love. Here she was Clara Whitmore, not Isla Vance, not Damien's missing wife. She taught literature at a small community school and owned a shelf full of worn paperbacks instead of diamond bracelets. Her son Eli was the reason she still smiled. He was 6, all wide brown eyes and constant questions, the kind of child who made every stranger in the market grin. "Mom," he said that morning, dragging his backpack across the floor, "do you think whales get lonely?" Isla looked up from the stove where pancakes sizzled. "Maybe. But they talk to each other across the whole ocean. They sing." Eli's face lit up. "Then they're like you. You always talk to me even when I'm in my room." She laughed softly, flipping a pancake. "Something like that, sweetheart." He climbed into his chair, swinging his legs. "You should write stories about whales." "Maybe I will one day," she said. "But first you need to eat before school." He groaned but started eating, and she watched him quietly, memorizing his face the way she did every morning. He looked more like her than Damien. Same soft features, the same little dimple that appeared when he smiled, but his eyes were unmistakable. Dark, sharp, the color of storms. Sometimes she caught him frowning over a puzzle or staring into space, and she saw Damien there, not in a frightening way but in something deeper. Determined. Certain. When she thought about that, she'd press a hand to her chest and whisper to herself, "He'll never find us. It's over." The day moved slowly. The classroom buzzed with chatter as she helped students cut paper stars for a space-themed project. "Miss Whitmore, are you coming to the fair tomorrow?" a little girl asked. "Of course," Isla smiled. "I promised Eli." By late afternoon she walked home through the narrow streets, her tote bag full of graded papers and crayons. The sun was lowering behind the water, turning everything gold. Sometimes she still felt like she was walking through a dream she wasn't supposed to have. A quiet, safe life. At the corner bookstore she paused at the display window. A new novel sat there. The Shadows of War, written by someone from Damien's old world. An investigative journalist who'd once attended one of their charity galas. She looked away quickly, pulse rising. Even after all these years, his world seemed to follow her like a ghost. That night, after Eli was asleep, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The stars were sharp above the black ocean. She took out her notebook, the one place she still called herself Isla, and began to write. 7 years ago I ran. I thought distance would erase him, but it only turned him into a myth. Sometimes I wonder if myths ever stop looking for the people who create them. A gust of wind scattered her loose pages. She caught them with a laugh, and froze when she saw headlights flash briefly at the far end of the street. A black car slowed, lingered, then turned away. Her breath caught. No, she told herself. Not him. Not after all this time. But even as she went inside and locked the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past had just turned its head toward her again. 2 weeks later, life seemed normal again. Spring was beginning. Eli had started drawing dragons, purple ones with crowns and smiling faces, and insisted they were protectors. "They watch us, Mom," he'd say, serious as only a child could be. But then one morning he didn't wake up easily. He was pale, lips faintly gray. "Eli." Isla shook him gently. "Sweetheart." He blinked weakly, murmuring, "I feel dizzy." Her heart stopped. Within the hour they were at the hospital. The pediatrician frowned as he read the results. "His red cell count is very low," he said carefully. "We'll need to run more tests." Isla sat frozen, hands clasped around her son's. "Is it serious?" "We don't know yet. But his energy levels and immune system are concerning. I want to refer you to a specialist in the city." The next few days were a blur of blood tests, waiting rooms, and whispered medical terms she didn't understand. Eli smiled through it all, brave in the way only children can be. "It's just a lot of needles, right, Mom?" he said as a nurse prepared another sample. "Honey. Just a few more," she whispered, kissing his forehead. When the final diagnosis came, the words hit her like a wall. Severe aplastic anemia. Bone marrow failure. Rare. Chronic. Urgent transplant recommended. Isla barely heard the rest. The doctor's voice seemed to fade as her world tilted. "Does he have any siblings?" "No." "Then we'll have to search for a donor in the National Registry." She nodded mechanically. "Do whatever you need. Please." Days later, she sat in the hospital garden while Eli napped inside. Her mind ran in circles. She'd built a new name, a new life, but biology didn't care about names. Somewhere out there, the other half of Eli's bloodline was walking free. And if genetics decided to be cruel, that man was the only one who could save her son. She whispered it aloud for the first time in years. "Damien." The name tasted like fear and memory. A week later, a nurse called her into the office. "We might have a match," the woman said, smiling carefully. "It's unusual, a perfect 10-point match. The sample came from a donor registered years ago in Chicago." Isla's fingers went numb. "Do you have a name?" "Not at this stage," the nurse said. "Everything's confidential. But the donor has been contacted and they've agreed to come for verification." Her voice became background noise. Isla could barely breathe. That night, after putting Eli to bed, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone. Her reflection stared back from the dark window. The same face, older, more careful. If the universe was cruel, it was already laughing. Miles away, in a skyscraper that touched the clouds, Damien Vale sat behind a black glass desk. He'd rebuilt everything in the years since her disappearance. The empire, the charities, the networks that reached every corner of the globe. His reputation had softened in public eyes, but power still flowed through every word he spoke. That afternoon his private phone rang. Few people had that number. "Vale," he answered. A female voice came through, crisp and professional. "Mr. Vale, this is Dr. Patel from Boston Children's Hospital. I apologize for contacting you directly, but we identified your HLA profile as a perfect match for a 5-year-old patient in need of a bone marrow transplant. The case is critical." He frowned. "I didn't know my records were still active. You registered 6 years ago during a charity event for your foundation." He leaned back, curious. "What's the patient's name?" A pause, then, "Eli Whitmore." Something in the name made his chest tighten. "And the mother?" "Clara Whitmore. We haven't been able to reach her yet for confirmation." He repeated the name softly, tasting it. Clara. It meant nothing, and yet, something about it felt too neat, too carefully chosen. "How old is the boy?" 6. 6. His fingers stilled on the desk. 6 years old. Send me everything, he said quietly. Medical records, genetic data. Everything you have. That evening, Isla got a call from the hospital. Mrs. Whitmore? We've confirmed a donor. He's agreed to fly in for testing. Her stomach turned. When? Tomorrow morning. She managed to thank them and hang up, then stood in the middle of the kitchen shaking. It couldn't be coincidence. It couldn't. She looked at Eli's drawing pinned to the fridge. A purple dragon standing between two figures, a small one with yellow hair and a tall one with dark eyes. He's coming for us, she whispered. The next day dawned bright and cold. She packed a small bag, snacks for Eli, his favorite toy rabbit, a book to read during the long hospital day. She kept telling herself she was imagining things. There were millions of donors. It didn't have to be him. But when she walked into the hospital lobby and saw the commotion near the entrance, the men in black suits, the flash of cameras quickly silenced, the presence that made everyone step aside, her heart stopped. The man at the center of it was taller than she remembered, sharper around the edges. His hair was darker now, his expression colder. But those eyes, those impossible eyes, met hers across the room like a held breath. Isla froze. The bag slipped from her fingers. For a moment the world fell away. 7 years of running, gone. 7 years of silence, shattered. Damien Vale was standing in front of her, and he looked like a man who'd just found something he'd buried long ago. He moved toward her slowly, the crowd parting without a word. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was soft, almost gentle. Hello, Isla. Her throat closed. She could barely whisper, You shouldn't be here. He tilted his head, studying her. And yet here I am. You've been busy. Miss Whitmore. Her heart pounded. She could hear Eli's voice behind her. Mom? And everything inside her screamed run. But Damien's gaze had already shifted past her, settling on the boy. For a moment his face changed. The hardness faltered. Something human raw flickered there. He took a step closer. He's mine. The words were quiet, certain. Isla grabbed Eli's hand. We need to go. Damien didn't stop her. He only said almost to himself, I told you once, Isla. You can disappear from the world but never from me. As the elevator doors closed, her reflection showed his face between them. Unreadable, unstoppable. And deep down she knew, the past hadn't just found her. It had been waiting. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Isla held Eli's small hand as they followed a nurse toward the consultation room. Every step felt heavier than the one before. She tried to calm her breathing. She told herself it couldn't be Damien. It had been 7 years. Maybe the donor just happened to come from Chicago. Maybe she was imagining everything. But her pulse disagreed. When the nurse opened the door, a familiar voice came through before she even looked up. Ms. Whitmore. The sound of it froze her. Deep, smooth, unmistakable. Damien Vale was sitting by the window in a charcoal suit that looked out of place among the hospital's pale walls. His dark eyes found her instantly. Hello again. The nurse seemed oblivious to the tension. This is our donor, Mr. Vale. He's agreed to preliminary testing before the procedure. Isla couldn't speak. Her mouth felt dry, her heart a wild rhythm in her chest. Damien stood, hands in his pockets, studying her face. You look the same, he said quietly. Except now you have a reason to run faster. He took a step back. You shouldn't be here. On the contrary. He looked at Eli. I have every reason to be. Eli glanced up at the tall stranger, curious but unafraid. Are you one of Mommy's friends? Damien's expression softened slightly. Something like that. Isla squeezed her son's hand. Eli, go with the nurse for a minute, okay? Mommy will come right after. When the boy left the room, the silence between them felt alive. Damien took a slow breath. You changed your name. Clever. But not clever enough. Don't, she said, her voice shaking. Don't start. He tilted his head. Start what? You disappeared for 7 years. The world thought you were dead. Do you know what it's like to bury someone who isn't gone? Her chest ached, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I did what I had to do. To hide my son? The words hit like a slap. She flinched, whispering, He's mine too. For a moment something raw flickered across his face. Not anger but something close to hurt. Then it vanished. I'll be part of his treatment, Damien said. I'll do the transplant. Whatever he needs. Her relief collided with fear. Thank you, she said carefully, then added, and when it's done we'll go back to our lives. He studied her for a long moment, then said softly, You still think you have a life without me? She swallowed hard. I made one. And I intend to see it. He stepped closer until the air seemed to thicken. You can keep pretending you don't care, Isla. But you came back to my world the moment you walked into this hospital. Then he turned and left, leaving her trembling in the sterile light. That night, Isla sat by Eli's bed in the children's ward. Machines hummed softly and the monitors blinked steady green lights. Eli stirred. Mom. I'm here, she whispered, stroking his hair. Who was that man? She hesitated. Someone helping us. He looks sad, Eli said. Isla blinked back tears. Maybe he is. In another part of the hospital, Damien spoke with the head physician. His tone was calm but his eyes were sharp. I want constant security outside her room. No one enters without clearance. Yes, Mr. Vale, the doctor replied quickly. But this is a hospital. Then make it safe like one, Damien interrupted. I'll cover every cost. He left the room and paused in the corridor, looking out at the city skyline beyond the glass. The lights below blurred with rain. He had spent years convincing himself she was gone. Yet now she was only a few doors away, breathing the same air. He didn't know if he wanted to hold her or curse her name. Marco, his longtime aide, approached quietly. Boss, our men found something. That cartel name you asked about, Vasquez. Their network's been active again. Boston area. Damien's jaw tightened. They know she's alive? Maybe. Or maybe they're looking for you. He nodded slowly. Either way, keep watch. No mistakes. By morning, Isla had barely slept. She walked down to the hospital cafe, trying to calm the shaking in her hands. She had to think. If Damien stayed involved, their quiet life was gone. When she turned from the counter, she almost ran into him. He was standing behind her, a coffee already in his hand. I remember you always forgot sugar, he said. Still true. Her voice came out smaller than she meant. What do you want, Damien? He looked at her for a long time. To help my son. And then we talk about why you ran. There's nothing to talk about. He gave a faint smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. There's 7 years to talk about. They stood in silence until the sound of a pager cut through the air. Isla's heart jumped. She rushed upstairs. The monitor outside Eli's room was flashing. Inside, nurses moved quickly around the bed. Just a fainting spell, one said. He's okay, just weak. Isla knelt by Eli's side. You scared me, baby. He smiled faintly. I just wanted to see if the angels were real. She bit her lip, holding his hand. When she looked up again, Damien was standing in the doorway. He said nothing, just watched her with something unreadable in his eyes. Later that afternoon, the doctor met them in the hall. Mr. Vale's tissue samples are a perfect match, she said. We can schedule the transplant within days. Isla felt her knees weaken. Damien's expression didn't change, but his hand flexed at his side. Do it, he said. Of course, the doctor nodded. We'll make arrangements immediately. When she left, Isla turned to him. Why are you doing this? He looked genuinely puzzled. Because he's my child. I mean, why you, not your foundation, not a donation. You could have stayed anonymous. I don't do anonymous, Damien said quietly. Not with family. She shook her head. You don't even know him. I intend to. He moved a step closer, his voice softer now. You don't have to be afraid of me, Isla. Her laugh was brittle. I've spent years being afraid of what you could do. I protected you, he said. You owned me, she whispered. He fell silent for a moment, then said, I'll protect you again. Whether you want it or not. And then he turned away, leaving her standing in the hallway, torn between gratitude and fear. That night she sat beside Eli's hospital bed while the rain beat softly against the window. Eli slept peacefully, his small hand wrapped around her fingers. She looked at him and whispered, You're all that matters. But deep inside she knew the truth she couldn't ignore. The world she'd built had already cracked. Somewhere out in the dark, forces she couldn't see were moving again, And Damien, the man she'd run from, might be the only one who could keep them both alive. The next morning the hospital felt different. Quieter, almost expectant. Nurses moved with hushed voices and every footstep echoed a little too loud. Isla sat by the window of Eli's room watching him draw in his notebook. He was coloring a dragon again, this one blue with silver wings. "Mom," he said, "do you think dragons ever get tired of flying?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe. But they always find a way to keep going." Eli tilted his head. "Like you." She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Something like that." But her eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds. She was waiting for him, though she hated herself for it. Down the hall, Damien Vale walked beside Dr. Patel, his long strides unhurried. "How soon can the transplant be done?" he asked. "We're finalizing the schedule," she replied. "Your recovery time will be short, but we'll keep you nearby for observation." He nodded, only half listening. "And the boy's condition?" Dr. Patel hesitated. "He's fragile. The sooner the better." When they reached Eli's door, Damien paused. Through the glass panel he saw Isla sitting by the bed, her head bent slightly as she listened to something the boy said. The light caught her hair. It struck him that she looked exactly as she had the first time he saw her years ago. The same quiet defiance, the same sadness. Dr. Patel gestured. "You can go in." He opened the door quietly. Eli looked up first. "Hi again," he said cheerfully. "Mom says you're helping me get better." Damien smiled slightly. "That's the plan." He crouched beside the bed. "How are you feeling, champ?" "Bored," Eli said. "But Mom said if I'm brave I get ice cream." "Then I'd say bravery is worth it." Isla said nothing, but her hand rested protectively on her son's arm. Damien turned to her. "Can we talk privately?" She nodded reluctantly and followed him into the hallway. They stood by the large window overlooking the parking lot, sunlight reflecting off the glass. Damien spoke first. "He's smart. Like you." She crossed her arms. "He's his own person." He studied her quietly. "Does he know who I am?" "No." "Will you tell him?" "I don't know." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "He deserves the truth." "So do I," she said. "You never told me what you were really involved in. All the secrets, the people who followed you. I couldn't live like that." Damien's voice dropped, calm but edged. "You think running made you safer? You think hiding changed what we are?" "What we were," she corrected. "And yes, it did. He has a normal life. A good one." He leaned closer. "You call this normal? Hiding behind a false name, waiting for a hospital to call with bad news." Her voice shook. "At least it was peaceful. Until now." They stood in silence, the hum of machines and distant voices filling the air. Finally Damien said softly, "You always thought I wanted control. I only ever wanted to keep you safe." "Safe?" she repeated bitterly. "I had to fake my death to feel safe." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, or maybe something deeper. "And yet here we are." She turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "After the transplant you'll leave. Promise me that." He didn't answer. She turned back. "Promise me, Damien." He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "No." That night Isla couldn't sleep. She sat by Eli's bed, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the hallway she saw shadows move, security guards posted by Damien's orders. She went to the door and whispered to one of them, "Tell him I don't need this." The man, tall and expressionless, simply said, "Mr. Vale's orders, ma'am." "Then tell Mr. Vale I said stop pretending to care." But she knew he wouldn't deliver the message. And deep down she also knew Damien did care, just in his own dangerous way. In another part of the hospital, Damien was in a small office, reading a file Marco handed him. "Everything checks out," Marco said. "Her new identity was airtight. You wouldn't have found her if not for the donor match." Damien's jaw tightened. "I know." Marco hesitated. "Boss, you sure about this? The Vasquez people have been quiet, but if they find out she's alive..." "They won't," Damien cut in. "And if they try, I'll handle it." He closed the file. "For 7 years I built everything back. But none of it mattered. Not until today." The morning of the pre-transplant meeting, The hospital's main conference room was empty except for Isla, Dr. Patel and Damien. Dr. Patel laid out the details, procedure steps, risks, recovery plans, but Isla barely heard her. Her eyes stayed on the table. When the doctor left them to sign paperwork, the silence between them thickened. Damien tapped the pen against the form. "You'll stay here during the operation." "I know," she said quietly. "And after that you and Eli will come with me." Her head snapped up. "What?" "My estate outside the city. It's secure. Safer than anywhere else." "No," she said firmly. "We're not going anywhere with you." His gaze didn't waver. "You think the people who went after me won't come for you if they find out you're alive? You were married to me. You were on their list once." She swallowed hard. "That was years ago. And they don't forget." She shook her head. "You don't get to decide where we live. I'm not giving you a choice." Her voice trembled, but she stood. "You can't control me anymore, Damien." He rose slowly, towering over her but keeping his tone calm. "This isn't about control. It's about protection." "You always say that," she whispered. "But protection feels a lot like a cage." Something flickered in his expression. Frustration, maybe even pain. "If it keeps you and him alive, I'll build a cage lined with gold." She turned away. "You don't understand what you're asking." "I understand exactly," he said. "You can hate me later. But for now you'll do as I say." Her eyes filled with tears. "You haven't changed at all." He paused. You're stronger. And that's why you're going to fight me every step of the way. Count on it." For a long moment neither spoke. Then Damien picked up the signed forms and left the room without another word. Later that day, Isla sat in the hospital garden, staring at the sky. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint sound of sirens from the city. Dr. Patel joined her quietly. "You've been through a lot." Isla smiled faintly. "That's one way to put it." The doctor hesitated. "He's difficult, but he means well. I've seen men who don't care at all. He's not one of them." "That doesn't make him safe," Isla said softly. "No," Dr. Patel agreed. "But sometimes safety isn't simple." That evening, Damien visited Eli again. The boy was sitting up in bed, sketching. "Hi," Eli said cheerfully. "Mom says you're my donor. That means we share blood, right?" Damien's chest tightened. "Yes. You could say that." "Cool," Eli said, showing him the drawing. "This one's for you." It was a picture of 3 dragons. One small, one large, and one watching over the other 2 from above. Damien stared at it for a moment before saying, "Thank you." His voice sounded rougher than usual. When he stepped into the hall, Isla was waiting. "You don't have to charm him." He looked at her evenly. "I'm not. I'm just meeting my son." She looked at him, tears threatening again. "If you care about him, don't drag him into your world." "I already did," he said quietly. "The moment he was born." Then he walked away, leaving her speechless once more. That night, while the hospital slept, Damien's phone buzzed. Marco's voice came through, low and urgent. "Boss, we've got a problem. Surveillance outside the hospital. Same cars we traced to the Vasquez network." Damien's expression darkened. "Double security. Move the cars to the back entrance. And no one tells Isla." "Yes, sir." When the call ended, Damien stood by the window, looking down at the glowing streets. He whispered to himself, "You'll be safe this time. Both of you." Back in the children's ward, Isla woke from a restless sleep, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. Through the glass door she thought she saw a shadow move, just a flicker, then vanish. She went to the window, staring into the darkness. Somewhere deep inside she knew Damien was right about one thing. The danger she'd run from 7 years ago wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for the right moment to return. And now that moment had come. The transfer happened before dawn. A low fog clung to the city streets, the hospital lights a pale glow in the gray. Isla watched from the passenger seat as 2 black SUVs rolled ahead of the ambulance that carried Eli. The flashing lights made brief red streaks across the wet pavement. She hadn't wanted to go. Damien had arranged everything with his usual quiet efficiency and left her no room to argue. "The hospital can't keep him safe," he'd said. "You know that." She had wanted to scream that safety wasn't a place, it was distance from him. But she'd looked at her sleeping son and said nothing. The convoy turned off the highway after an hour and climbed into the hills. Through the fog she saw the outline of stone walls and iron gates. When they swung open, a mansion appeared, less a home than a fortress built from glass and shadow. Guards stood at discreet intervals, earpieces glinting in the light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Hallways stretched wide, lined with quiet art and soft carpet that swallowed footsteps. Every door opened with a coded keypad. Eli woke as they carried him in. "Where are we, Mom?" he murmured. "A friend's house," she said, brushing his hair back. "You'll rest here until you're strong again." He looked past her at Damien, who followed them through the doorway. "Is this your house?" Damien nodded. "It's yours for as long as you need it." Eli smiled, half asleep. "Cool." Isla turned away so Damien wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. The next morning the sun came out for the first time in days. From the balcony outside the room assigned to them, Isla could see the lake below the estate and the city far away beyond the trees. It was beautiful. And it terrified her. A soft knock came at the door. Damien stepped in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You didn't eat breakfast." "I wasn't hungry," she said. He set the mug on the table. "There's a doctor on staff, a full medical wing, a team watching the perimeter. You don't have to be afraid." She met his eyes. "You built a cage and you're calling it safety." "I built what I know," he said simply. "Walls keep things out." "And in," she whispered. He looked out the window for a long moment before saying, "The transplant is in 48 hours. After that you can decide where to go." "You'll let us leave?" "If you still want to," he said. "If it's safe." She wanted to ask what safe meant in his world but didn't. Instead she said, "Thank you. For helping him." He gave a faint smile. "You never had to thank me for that." When he left, the silence of the room returned, thick but somehow less suffocating. That afternoon Eli was strong enough to walk a few steps in the garden. The bodyguard trailing them tried to keep a respectful distance. The boy was fascinated by everything: stone fountains, bright koi fish, a greenhouse full of orchids. "Mom," he said, tugging her hand, "look. There's a tree house." High up in the oldest oak stood a small platform with a rope ladder. Damien was there talking to a security officer. He saw them and waved Eli over. "Hey, the boy asked. Isla hesitated then nodded. "Be careful." She watched as Damien helped him climb halfway, pointing out how to grip the ladder. Eli's laugh echoed through the garden, free and bright. For a moment the years between her and Damien vanished. Only the image of father and son remained, sunlight on their faces. When Eli reached the platform he turned and waved. "Mom, you have to come up." She smiled weakly. "Maybe later." Damien looked down at her. "He's brave," he said. "He didn't get that from me," she replied. His expression softened. "You'd be surprised." That evening, Isla sat by the window with a book she wasn't reading. Outside, lights flickered along the perimeter wall. Somewhere below she heard a car engine start then fade into the distance. The household was quiet, too quiet. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're not safe there. Leave tonight." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She read it twice then deleted it. Moments later another message appeared. "He can't protect you from them." She stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then she locked the phone, went to Eli's room and sat beside him until morning. The transplant day arrived with clear skies. Nurses moved efficiently through the house, preparing equipment. A sterile area had been set up in a bright room overlooking the garden. The hospital staff called it temporary, but it felt permanent. Isla paced outside while Damien changed into surgical clothing. Dr. Patel came to her side. "He'll be fine," the doctor said. "It's a simple extraction. Your son's procedure follows immediately." Isla nodded, gripping the back of a chair. "And after?" "Recovery for both of them. A few weeks, maybe less." She watched through the glass as Damien lay on the operating table, calm as ever. His eyes found hers through the window, and for a second she saw something she hadn't in years: tiredness, maybe fear. He gave a small nod before the anesthesia took him under. Hours later it was done. Eli slept peacefully, color returning to his cheeks. The nurses whispered that the graft looked good. Isla sat beside him, holding his hand, relief washing through her like rain after drought. When Damien woke later that evening, Pale but alert, she went to see him. He was sitting up, fur in his arm, looking out the window. The room smelled of disinfectant and pine. "You did it," she said quietly. He turned toward her, voice rough. "How is he?" "Resting. Better." "Good." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Then it was worth it." She hesitated, then sat in the chair beside his bed. "You didn't have to come yourself." "Yes, I did." They were silent for a long time, the soft beeping of monitors the only sound. Then Damien said, "You should know something. The people who wanted me dead back then, the Vasquez group, they're not gone. They're regrouping. That's why I brought you here." She looked at him, startled. "You think they'll come after us?" "I know they will if they learn Eli exists." Her stomach tightened. "How did they even know about me?" He hesitated. "Back then there was a leak inside my company. Someone close sold information. I spent years cleaning it up." "Who?" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me," she said. "Because if that person's still out there, they could find us." Damien met her gaze. "That's what I'm trying to stop." She rose and paced to the window. "I don't know how to live like this again. Always watching." "You won't have to," he said. "Once it's safe, you can go wherever you want." She turned sharply. "And what about you?" He smiled faintly. "I stopped pretending I had anywhere else to go." That night a storm rolled in from the lake. Rain lashed against the glass walls, thunder echoing through the hills. Isla sat in the control room with Marco, watching the security feeds. Most screens showed only trees swaying in the wind. Then one flickered. A dark shape moved at the edge of the property. Another followed. Marco leaned forward. "Motion sensors, north fence." "Two figures." "Your men?" Isla asked. He shook his head. "Too close to the ground." "Not ours." He grabbed his radio, barking orders. Guards responded, rushing into the storm. The screens filled with static for a moment, then cleared to show nothing but rain. "Could be animals," Marco said, though his voice sounded uncertain. Isla turned toward the window. Lightning flashed, illuminating the woods, and for a second she saw something that froze her blood. A glint of metal, the outline of a human shape. Then darkness again. Minutes later, Damien entered, a blanket thrown over his shoulders, still pale from surgery. "What happened?" "Movement outside," Marco said. "Teams checking." Damien's eyes met Isla's. "You see anything?" "Just shadows." He nodded slowly. "Keep the lights on. No one goes outside tonight." When he left, Isla followed him down the hall. "You shouldn't be walking after surgery." He stopped by the stairs. "I've been through worse." "You always say that." "And I always mean it." For a moment neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "If they come, I won't run again." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a tired smile. "Good. Because this time you won't have to." The storm passed by morning. The guards found nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry. But Damien kept the house locked down. When the sun rose, the lake shone like silver behind the trees. Eli woke, stronger than before, and the doctors spoke of recovery. For the first time in years, Isla allowed herself to breathe. She stepped onto the balcony and watched the light spread across the water. Damien joined her a few minutes later, moving carefully but upright. "He's getting better," she said. "He's tough," Damien replied. "Just like his mother." She gave a small laugh. "Maybe a little like his father too." They stood in silence, the morning wind lifting the curtains behind them. Finally she said, "When all this started, I thought you were the danger. Maybe I was wrong." He looked at her. "I was the danger," he said. "But I'm trying not to be anymore." Something in his tone made her believe him. The lake shimmered below, peaceful for the moment. But both of them knew peace was fragile. An intermission before the next storm. Morning sunlight spilled across the vast glass walls of the estate, but it did little to calm Isla's nerves. 2 days had passed since the storm. The security teams had doubled their patrols, cameras replaced and motion sensors tested. Nothing unusual appeared again, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still watching from beyond the trees. Inside, life moved on as if nothing had happened. Eli's recovery amazed everyone. The doctors called it miraculous. His cheeks were flushed with color and his laughter once again filled the halls. But every time Isla smiled back, a thought haunted her. What if this piece is only a pause before something worse? She found Damien in the study, standing before a wall of screens showing surveillance feeds. Maps and data flickered under his fingers as he typed. He wore a simple gray sweater now, not the armor of suits she remembered, but he looked as controlled as ever. "Any updates?" she asked. He didn't turn immediately. "Nothing solid. Whoever was near the perimeter knew what they were doing. No heat signatures, no tracks." "Then maybe it really was animals," she said, hoping for it to sound convincing. He finally turned to face her. "I've been hunted before. Animals don't cut power to cameras." Her chest tightened. "You think they found us?" "I think someone wants me nervous," he replied. "That means they're close." She folded her arms. "You built this fortress. If it's not safe here, then where?" He looked out the window. "Nowhere in this world stays safe forever. You just buy time." She didn't answer. He seemed older now, not in years but in weariness. For the first time she wondered if the danger chasing him had done more damage than he admitted. By noon, Eli was in the greenhouse with one of the guards, learning how to plant herbs. Isla watched him from the doorway, smiling. The guard, an older man named Ronan, was patient and gentle with the boy. For a moment the world felt almost normal. Then her phone vibrated again. No number. Just a message. "He's lying to you. Check the east wing. Midnight. Alone." Her hands trembled. She looked around. No one seemed to notice. She slipped the phone into her pocket and forced a smile when Eli looked up. That night the house fell into its usual quiet rhythm. Guards made their rounds, lights dimmed, and the rain began again. Isla waited until the clock read 11:59, then left her room. The east wing was the oldest part of the mansion, its halls narrower and colder. Her footsteps echoed faintly against marble floors. At first, nothing seemed strange, until she reached a locked door she had never seen before. A keypad blinked red beside it. "Check the east wing," the message had said. She hesitated, her heart beat loud in her ears. Behind her, a voice said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." She turned sharply. Damien stood in the shadows, wearing a black coat, eyes unreadable. "What is this place?" she demanded. He didn't answer at once. "Old storage. Nothing you need to worry about." She took a step closer. "Someone told me to come here. I got a message." "I know," he interrupted. "From an untraceable number. I saw it. The network is trying to pull you into a trap." "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I would do," he said simply. For a long moment they stood facing each other, the tension sharp as wire. Finally he sighed. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." He entered a code into the keypad. The lock clicked open. The door swung inward to reveal a small control room, dimly lit, filled with monitors and files. "These are the people we're dealing with," he said. On the screens were faces, documents, coordinates, evidence of a network stretching across cities. "They've been tracking my company, my assets, everything. And now they've moved closer." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Isla whispered. "Because I wanted to be sure before I scared you." She shook her head. "You still think you can fight everyone? You can't protect everything forever, Damien." He looked at her, voice low. "Then I'll protect what matters most." Her breath caught. "Us." He didn't deny it. Outside, thunder rumbled. The monitors flickered once, twice, then went dark. "Power cut," Damien said immediately. "Stay here." "Wait." But he was already gone. She stood in the dim glow of emergency lights, listening to the distant sound of footsteps and static on the intercom. Minutes stretched endlessly. Then she heard a single distant gunshot. The sound froze her blood. Moments later, Damien's voice crackled through the speaker. "It's handled. Stay with Eli. Don't open the doors for anyone." Then silence. By morning the lights returned. No explanation was offered. The guards moved as if nothing had happened. But Isla saw it in their eyes. Tension, fear, something unspoken. When she found Damien in the courtyard, he was giving quiet orders to his men. His left arm was bandaged. "You're hurt," she said. "Not badly." "What happened last night?" He hesitated. "A warning. They wanted me to know they could reach us." She wanted to ask who they were, but his expression stopped her. Will they come again? Yes, he said. And next time they won't knock. 3 nights later the attack came. It began with silence. All the power cut at once, the hum of machines and lights dying into darkness. Then came the sharp crack of glass somewhere below and the echo of distant shouting. Isla woke instantly. She grabbed Eli, still half asleep, and pulled him toward the hidden door Damien had shown her 2 days earlier. Stay close, baby, she whispered. Don't look back. From the hallway came the sound of boots, running, gunfire. The air smelled faintly of smoke. They reached the narrow passage that led to a reinforced safe room. Inside were supplies, communication lines, and monitors that showed the house from multiple angles. Eli clung to her. Mom, what's happening? Just noise, she lied. We'll be okay. The monitors flickered to life. On one screen she saw Damien moving through the lower hall, barking orders, firelight flashing behind him. The intruders wore masks, their movements coordinated. One of the guards shouted something, then a grenade exploded, shaking the feed into static. Eli cried out. She held him tighter. Minutes passed like hours. She could hear faint alarms through the walls, the rhythm of chaos above. Then the door to the safe room opened and Damien stood there, breathing hard, soot on his clothes. It's clear, he said. Come on. She followed him through the darkened hallways. The smell of burning wood filled the air. Part of the east wing was in flames, sparks licking the ceiling. Damien led them through the smoke toward the main staircase, his injured arm cradled close. Outside, security vehicles blazed their lights across the courtyard. Rain began again, hissing against the fire. When they reached the open air, Isla turned to him. You said we were safe here. He met her gaze, eyes fierce but tired. I said I'd keep you safe. That's different. She looked back at the burning house. What now? He glanced toward the cars waiting near the gate. We leave. Tonight. Where? Somewhere they can't follow. She wanted to argue but Eli clung to her leg, shivering. She only nodded. They drove through the storm in silence. Damien sat in the front seat beside Marco, scanning the dark road. Isla held Eli close in the back, the child's small heartbeat steady against her chest. Finally, after miles of empty forest, the convoy stopped at an old airstrip. A private jet waited under the rain. Damien, you're hurt, Isla said as they climbed the steps. You need a doctor. There'll be one on board, he replied. When they were seated, the engines roared to life. Outside, the flames of the distant estate glowed faintly against the clouds. Eli looked out the window. Are we going home? Isla kissed his hair. We're going somewhere new. He nodded sleepily. As long as we're together. Hours later, the plane landed on a small island off the coast. Morning light broke through the clouds as they disembarked. The air smelled of salt and rain. This is one of your places too? She asked. Damien nodded. Old property. No one knows about it. He led them through a narrow path toward a cluster of simple houses by the water. Everything was quiet except for waves and distant gulls. Eli ran ahead, laughing for the first time since the fire. Isla watched him, then turned to Damien. They'll come again, won't they? Yes, he said. But not today. And what happens when they do? He looked out at the sea. Then we stop running. She studied him for a moment. You always think you can fight everything alone. I don't have a choice, he said. Not anymore. She shook her head. You do. You could let people in. Let someone help. He smiled faintly. You mean you? She didn't answer. The wind carried her silence away, along with the scent of rain and the echo of fire still burning somewhere behind them. That night, from the small cottage overlooking the sea, Isla watched the horizon fade to dark. Eli was asleep, safe at last for now. She thought of everything they'd lost, the house, the years, the peace, and of what they might still rebuild. In the distance, Damien stood by the water, a solitary figure against the waves. For all his strength, he looked alone. She whispered to the empty room, You can't fight every shadow forever. But maybe, just maybe, together they could find a dawn that lasted longer than a single night. The island slept under the steady hum of the tide. Days passed quietly, too quietly. The storm that had chased them away from the mainland had broken into soft rain that fell at night and left the mornings washed clean. The sea breeze carried the smell of salt and driftwood through the open windows of the small cottage where Isla and Eli stayed. Eli's strength returned quickly. Each morning he ran down the beach chasing shells, leaving small footprints that the waves erased before noon. Isla watched from the porch, coffee in her hands, the sound of his laughter mixing with the sea. For the first time in years she allowed herself to believe he might have a real future. Damien had kept mostly to himself. He spent his days at a makeshift desk by the window of the second cottage, speaking quietly into encrypted phones, drawing lines and notes on a map that never left his sight. He rarely slept. When he did, the light in his room stayed on. One evening after Eli had gone to bed, Isla walked across the sand to his cottage. The light was still burning. "You're working again," she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. Trying to figure out who set the fire. They were professionals. Too clean for mercenaries. "You can't fight ghosts, Damien." He set the pen down and leaned back. "Ghosts can still pull triggers." She stepped closer, noticing the stack of files on the table. "You've been keeping everything, haven't you? Every name, every face." "I don't forget the people who try to destroy what's mine." She frowned. "We're not things to protect. We're people who need peace." He looked at her for a long moment. "Peace is earned by the ones who fight for it." For a time neither spoke. Outside, the waves rolled steady against the shore. She could see how tired he looked. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. 7 years of searching and surviving had carved that weariness deep into him. "I used to think you never felt fear," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I didn't. Until the night you disappeared." The honesty in his voice startled her. He stood and crossed to the window, staring out into the darkness. "You left a note once. Half of one. I read it until the paper fell apart." Her breath caught. "You found that?" "I found everything you tried to bury," he said. "And I asked myself 1,000 times if you ran because you hated me or because you couldn't stand the world I built." She hesitated. "It was never hate." "Then what was it?" "Fear," she whispered. "Not of you, of what loving you turned me into. I couldn't tell where your world ended and mine began." He turned back to her. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. "And now?" "Now I don't know what's left," she said. A long silence followed, filled only by the sound of rain against the glass. Then Damien said, "You were right to run. But I was right to find you." He took a step toward her, then stopped. "You should get some rest. The wind's changing. Storm coming again." When she left his cottage, the air was cold and heavy with mist. Behind her, the light stayed on long after midnight. By dawn the sea had turned steel gray. The wind rose, throwing spray against the rocks. Marco, Damien's second-in-command, was already outside with 2 men checking equipment and fuel drums near the dock. Isla helped Eli bundle into his coat. "Stay close to the house today, okay?" He nodded. "Can I read the pirate book again?" "As many times as you want." She smiled, but her mind stayed uneasy. The sky felt like a warning. Inside, Damien was on a call. "No, keep the satellite channel open," he said into the phone. "If the signal goes dead again, we move at once." He ended the call and looked up as Isla entered. "We're expecting contact from an old ally. He says he knows who funded the attack." "Can you trust him?" "I used to," Damien said. "That's worth something until it isn't." Before she could reply, Marco entered, rain dripping from his jacket. "We've got company on the East Beach. Small boat, no flag." Damien was already moving. "Stay here," he told Isla. "You can't go alone." He paused just long enough to look at her. "You keep Eli safe. That's how you help." Then he and his men disappeared into the storm. Hours later the radio crackled. Static first, then a voice she didn't recognize. "Tell Vale his friend sends regards. He's not the only one who keeps ledgers." Then silence. Isla stared at the radio, dread crawling up her spine. She found Marco returning alone, limping slightly. "Where's Damien?" she demanded. "Gone after them," he said. "One of the intruders slipped inland. He wouldn't let us follow. He'll be killed." Marco shook his head. "He's survived worse." She turned toward the door, grabbing her coat. "I'm not waiting here." "You can't." But she was already outside, the wind tearing at her hair, rain blinding her eyes. She followed the muddy path toward the cliffs. In the distance, flashes of light cut through the storm, gunfire, then silence. "Damien," she shouted, but the wind swallowed her voice. When she reached the ridge, she found him crouched near a fallen figure. The man on the ground wore black, a small device clutched in his hand. Damien was bleeding from a cut on his temple. "Are you hurt?" she gasped. He shook his head. "It's not mine." He pried the device from the man's hand. It was a small transmitter, the light still blinking. "They've been tracking us from inside." She stared. "Inside? You mean, someone here?" He nodded grimly. "Someone sent them our coordinates." They carried the captured equipment back to the cottage. Marco joined them, his expression dark. Damien set the transmitter on the table. "It's been active for weeks," he said. "They always knew where we were." "Who could plant it?" Isla asked. "Only someone with access to the security network." He looked at Marco. "That narrows it." For a second Marco said nothing. Then he exhaled. "You think it's me?" "I think someone close is lying," Damien said quietly. Marco's eyes flashed. "I took a bullet for you in Milan. I've kept this family breathing for 10 years. And yet," Damien said, "someone has been feeding them our every move." The silence that followed was knife-edged. Then Isla spoke. "We don't have time to fight each other. Whoever sent that signal will know the attack failed. They'll come again." Damien turned to her. "You're right. We leave before dark." He handed the transmitter to Marco. "Find out how far it's broadcast. If you're clear, meet us at the northern inlet." Marco hesitated, then nodded. "You'll know by nightfall whether you can trust me." When he was gone, Isla said softly, "You shouldn't have sent him away alone." "If he's innocent, he'll return," Damien said. "If not, we'll know soon enough." By evening the rain had stopped, leaving the island wrapped in fog. Damien loaded supplies into the small boat moored behind the rocks. Eli slept in Isla's arms, exhausted from the day's tension. She watched Damien secure the ropes. "What if Marco doesn't come back? Then we find another way off this island." She hesitated. "You still don't trust anyone, do you?" He met her eyes. "Trust gets people killed." "Maybe not trusting does too," she said quietly. He said nothing. The waves lapped against the hull in a slow rhythm. They were almost ready to push off when a distant explosion shattered the calm. A plume of smoke rose from the direction of the main dock. Damien swore under his breath. "That's where Marco was." "Is he?" "I don't know." He gripped her shoulder. "We move now." She clutched Eli closer as they boarded the boat. The motor hummed softly, cutting through the fog as the shoreline receded behind them. The sky was darkening again, streaked with red from the distant fire. "Damien," she said after a while, "if we keep running, how does this end?" He looked straight ahead. "With the truth." She frowned. "What truth?" He hesitated, then said, "The attack wasn't meant for me. It was meant for you." Her blood ran cold. "What?" "The Vasquez group didn't lose interest after you disappeared. You testified against one of their allies years ago before we met. They only found out after you became my wife. That's why they came then and now." She stared at him, stunned. "You knew." "I learned after you were gone," he said quietly. "I kept it buried to keep you safe." Tears blurred her vision. "All this time I thought it was your world that destroyed us." He shook his head. "No, Isla. It was yours colliding with mine." They drifted in silence as the fog swallowed the burning island behind them. Hours later, the boat reached a hidden cove. Damien helped her onto the rocks, then carried the sleeping boy. The air smelled of salt and smoke. The stars were veiled by thin clouds. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "There's an old contact in Lisbon who can help us disappear again," he said. "For good this time." She looked at him. "You'd let us go? If it means you live." He sounded exhausted, more human than she'd ever heard him. She touched his arm. "You can stop running too, you know." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe one day." Behind them, dawn began to touch the horizon with pale light. The sea hissed softly against the rocks. For the first time since the fire, Isla felt a fragile hope, thin as glass but real. The truth had burned away the lies, and what remained between them was simple. Two people and a child, alive against all odds, standing on the edge of another uncertain day. The coast of Portugal rose slowly out of the mist like a secret being revealed. After days at sea, The little boat drifted into a narrow harbor lined with old stone walls and faded fishing nets. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries echoing against the cliffs. Damien guided the boat to a quiet dock. His arm was still bandaged, but his movements were steady. Isla held Eli close, the boy blinking sleepily at the new world around them. "Where are we?" she asked. "South of Lisbon," Damien said. "Small port, no records, no customs." "Another hiding place?" He looked at her. "A starting point." They moved through narrow streets until they reached a small inn at the edge of town. It was a humble building, whitewashed walls with blue shutters. The woman at the counter greeted them in Portuguese. Damien answered easily, paying cash for 2 rooms. As they climbed the stairs, Isla asked, "You speak Portuguese?" "Enough," he said. "When you deal with weapons dealers, you learn quickly." She stopped halfway up. "You still deal with them?" He shook his head. "Not for years. Not since you." Something in his tone made her heartbeat slow, but she said nothing. Later, when Eli was asleep, Isla joined Damien on the small balcony. The sea stretched out in front of them, black and endless. "Eli's getting stronger," she said. "The doctors were right about his recovery." "I'm glad," he replied. "He deserves a life away from all this." She studied him. "What about you?" He smiled faintly. "People like me don't get away." "That's not true," she said softly. "You helped him. You saved us." "I also put you in danger," he said. "Everything I touch breaks eventually." She reached for his hand before she could stop herself. "Not everything." For a long moment they just sat there listening to the wind. Then Damien said, "Tomorrow we meet someone who can get you out. New papers, new country." "You're not coming?" He hesitated. "If I stay near, they'll keep chasing you. The Vasquez network is fractured but not gone. I can't disappear, not yet." "You'll let us go alone?" "If it keeps you safe," he said quietly. The words settled between them like cold rain. Isla wanted to argue, but she saw the truth in his face. He wasn't leaving because he wanted to. He was leaving because he had no other choice. The next day the contact arrived. A woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and efficient. She introduced herself only as Sophia. "I can move them," she told Damien. "Mother and child, new identity, no trace. But if you're involved, they'll find the trail again." Damien nodded. "Do it." Sophia turned to Isla. "You leave tomorrow at sunrise. Travel light." When she left, Isla said, "So this is it." "For now," Damien said. "You'll have peace again." "And you?" He didn't answer. He looked out at the sea instead, the horizon sharp and bright under the morning sun. That evening they walked with Eli along the beach. The boy ran ahead chasing waves. "Mom. Look," he shouted, holding up a shell that glittered in the light. "It's beautiful," Isla said, smiling. Damien crouched beside the child. "Keep it. It'll remind you where you came from." Eli nodded solemnly. "Will you come with us?" Isla held her breath. Damien looked at the boy and said gently, "Not yet. But I'll find you again. Promise." "I promise." Eli seemed satisfied with that. He ran back to the water, laughing. Isla turned to Damien. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep." He met her eyes. "I never break the ones that matter." That night Isla couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching moonlight shimmer on the waves. Her thoughts tangled between fear and longing. Around midnight she heard footsteps outside the room. She opened the door to find Damien standing there. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Neither could you." He hesitated, then said, "I needed to tell you something before morning." "What?" "When I said you'd have peace, that doesn't mean you have to forget me." She swallowed hard. "You're not easy to forget." For the first time in years he smiled. A real one, small and tired. "Good." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Be careful, Damien." "I always am," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. Then he was gone. The next morning came with the sound of distant sirens. Isla woke to shouting in the street. Damien burst through the door. "They found us," he said. "Vasquez men. 2 cars." Her blood ran cold. "Eli." "He's with Sophia." "Go." They ran through the narrow alleyways as the sound of engines grew louder. Bullets cracked against the walls behind them. Damien grabbed her hand, pulling her around a corner toward the docks. "There's a boat waiting," he said. "Go with them." "What about you?" "I'll cover you." "No," she shouted. "We stay together." He looked at her, eyes fierce. "If you die, everything I've done means nothing. Go." Before she could answer, more shots rang out. He shoved her toward the boat, then turned back, firing at the men closing in. She climbed aboard, dragging Eli into her arms as Sophia started the engine. The boat lurched forward. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw Damien on the dock, returning fire until the fog swallowed him from sight. "Damien!" she screamed, but the wind carried her voice away. The sea carried them far from the port before sunrise. By the time the sun rose, the city was only a distant smudge behind them. Eli slept wrapped in a blanket. Sophia steered the boat with steady hands. Isla sat on the deck, staring at the empty horizon, trying not to imagine what might have happened to Damien. When Sophia spoke, her voice was calm. He knew what he was doing. Isla turned to her. "You think he's alive?" "I've seen men like him," Sophia said. "They don't die easily." It wasn't comfort, but it was something. They reached another port by mid-morning, a quiet town where Sophia's contacts waited with new documents and clothes. Isla watched the names change before her eyes. Hers, Eli's, everything. "Who are we now?" she asked softly. Sophia smiled faintly. "Whoever you want to be." Weeks passed. They settled in a small coastal village under their new names. The house was small but warm, with white walls and a view of the sea. Eli went to school, learned Portuguese quickly, and filled the house with laughter again. Isla worked at a local cafe, serving coffee and pastries to tourists who never looked twice at her. Life was quiet, safe. But every evening when she stood on the beach watching the sunset, her thoughts drifted to Damien. Sometimes she imagined him alive, rebuilding somewhere far away. Other times she imagined nothing at all, just the endless horizon and the silence he left behind. One night, months later, she received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. "You told me once peace was impossible. Maybe you were right. But I hope you found something close. Keep him safe. That's all that matters." There was no signature, only a pressed seal, an emblem she recognized from his ring. Her hands shook as she read it again and again. "He's alive," she whispered. Eli came running in holding a drawing. "Mom. It's us in the ocean." She smiled, blinking away tears. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." He pointed at a figure drawn near the waves, a tall shape in black. "That's the man from my dream. He said he watches the sea so we don't get lost." She hugged him tightly. "Maybe he does." Years later, the world changed again. One morning, a news story played on the cafe's television. A report about a mysterious figure who had dismantled the last remnants of the Vasquez network. The anchor called him the Ghost of Lisbon. No name, no photo, just a rumor of a man who appeared when others vanished. Isla stood frozen, a cup in her hand, heart pounding. That night she walked to the beach. The air was cool, the tide low. She took a folded letter from her pocket, the one she'd never sent before she ran all those years ago, and placed it in a glass bottle. She whispered, "You once told me you'd find us. Maybe this time I'll find you." Then she threw the bottle into the waves and watched it drift until it vanished into the dark. Months later, a man walked along a distant shore, the wind tugging at his coat. He saw something glinting in the surf and bent to pick it up. A glass bottle. Inside, a letter. He opened it and a small, tired smile touched his lips. Above the horizon, the sun rose. The morning light fell softly through the lace curtains of the small seaside home. It had been 3 years since the night Isla and Eli escaped the chaos in Lisbon. The past had settled into quiet layers, sand, sea, and memory. The town had accepted them without question. Isla worked at the library now, where the days were measured by the turning of pages instead of the ticking of clocks. Eli had grown into a bright 9-year-old, full of energy and curiosity, his laughter ringing through the narrow cobbled streets. Every evening after closing the library, Isla would walk to the beach with a thermos of tea. She'd sit on the same worn bench overlooking the water and watch the horizon until the sun dissolved into gold. Sometimes she thought of Damien, wondering if he still lived in the shadows or if the sea had finally claimed him. But she never stopped hoping. One afternoon, as the tide crept closer to her shoes, She noticed a stranger at the edge of the sand, an old fisherman with kind eyes. He approached slowly, holding something wrapped in cloth. "Senora Whitmore?" he asked, using her assumed name. "Yes," she said carefully. "This was found near the rocks after the last storm." He handed her the bundle. Inside was a weather-worn envelope sealed with wax, the same emblem she had once seen on Damien's ring. Her breath caught. The fisherman nodded politely and left her alone. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. "Slaw. By the time you read this, you'll have built the life I couldn't give you. That was always the point. I've spent years erasing the last of what hunted us. It's finished now. They won't find you again. I thought I could disappear, but peace is not silence. It's knowing you're both safe. That's enough for me. Tell Eli his father kept his promise. D. Isla pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes blurring with tears. For a long time she stayed there, the sound of the waves folding around her. When she finally stood, she looked out over the endless water. The wind lifted her hair, warm and gentle, carrying the faint scent of salt and sun. "Thank you," she whispered to the horizon. Weeks later she decided to write back, not to send it but to release it. She wrote late into the night, the room lit only by a small lamp. "Damien, you said peace is knowing we're safe. Maybe it's also knowing you're still somewhere out there, alive in the world. Eli's strong. He talks about you sometimes. He says he dreams of a man standing on a beach watching the ships pass. Maybe it's you. I never stopped believing you would find your way home, even if that home was only memory. We're waiting just in case." She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope and wrote only one word on the front. Home. At dawn she walked with Eli to the beach. They watched as she placed the letter in another glass bottle. "Who's it for, Mom?" Eli asked. "A friend," she said softly. "Someone who once promised he'd find us again." "Will he?" "I think so," she said. "When the sea decides the time is right." She threw the bottle into the waves. It bobbed once, twice, and began to drift away, catching the morning light. Eli slipped his small hand into hers. "Then we'll wait." They stood there until the bottle was just a glint on the horizon. Months passed. Life went on. The letter became a memory like so many others carried away by time and tide. But something in Isla felt lighter, as if the act of writing had closed a circle left open for too long. Until one crisp autumn morning when a letter arrived at the library. Ordinary paper, no seal, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside were a few words and a single photograph. "The sea keeps its promises." The photograph showed a sunrise over an unfamiliar coastline. Standing at the edge of the water was a man in a dark coat, his face turned away, a small shell balanced in his palm. The same shell Eli had once found years ago in Portugal. 5 more years passed. The town had grown busier with more tourists and bright cafes along the shore. Eli was 14 now, taller, louder, forever asking questions Isla didn't always know how to answer. He loved the ocean as much as his father had. Most mornings he went surfing with friends before school, his laughter echoing across the waves. Isla watched him from the balcony, a quiet pride warming her chest. She still worked at the library. She still walked the beach every evening. But she no longer waited with the same ache she once had. She believed simply that if Damien were alive he would appear when the time was right. And one ordinary day he did. It began like any other Saturday. The market in the square, the smell of roasted chestnuts, the sound of church bells in the distance. Isla carried a basket of groceries home. As she turned the corner by the cafe, someone stepped into her path. A man. Tall, familiar. Dressed simply in a dark jacket. His hair was threaded with gray now, his face older, but the eyes, the same deep, steady eyes, stopped her breath. For a moment neither of them moved. "Hello, Isla," he said quietly. Her voice failed her. She reached out, touched his arm, half afraid he might vanish. "You're real." He smiled, a faint curve of lips. "So are you." She blinked away tears. "I thought after Lisbon. I almost didn't make it," he said. "But I promised I'd find you again." "How did you?" "Your letters," he said simply. "The one you sent years ago, washed ashore near the Azores. It found me." She gave a watery laugh. "The sea really does keep its promises." He nodded. "So do I." They stood there in the quiet street, the world moving around them, voices, footsteps, laughter, all fading to a distant hum. Finally she whispered, Eli's at the beach. Damien's gaze softened. I know. I saw him from the hill. He looks like you. He has your eyes, she said. Pause. Then, does he know? Not yet. But he's always felt it. They walked to the shore together. The afternoon light turned the water silver. Eli was on the sand carrying his surfboard laughing with friends. When he saw his mother he waved, and then his gaze caught on the man beside her. He slowed. Mom. Isla's heart pounded. She looked at Damien then at her son. Eli, there's someone I want you to meet. The boy studied the stranger for a long moment, something dawning in his expression. It's you, he said softly. From the stories. Damien smiled gently. I suppose so. Eli looked between them uncertain then stepped forward. You're my father, aren't you? Damien's throat worked before he managed a quiet, yes. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then Eli dropped his surfboard and threw his arms around him. Damien froze, then hugged him back tightly as if afraid to let go. Isla turned away, tears stinging her eyes. The sea roared softly behind them, endless and steady. When she looked back, Damien was still holding Eli, his face buried in the boy's hair. Years of distance dissolved in that single embrace. That evening the three of them walked along the beach as the sun sank low. Eli ran ahead, skipping stones into the surf. Damien and Isla followed slowly, their footsteps leaving twin lines in the wet sand. He's everything we hoped he'd be, Damien said quietly. He had to be, Isla replied. He had both of us inside him. They stopped near the rocks where she had once thrown her letter into the waves. Do you ever think, she said softly, that maybe we were meant to find peace this way, not by running but by stopping? He looked at her. I think peace was never about where we were. It was who we were willing to become. A long silence followed. Then Isla said, You could stay, you know. Just stay. He studied her face, the fading sunlight catching the gold in her eyes. You'd want that? After everything? She smiled faintly. We've already lost too much time not to try. He reached out, his hand brushing hers. Then I'll stay. They stood together as the last light slipped below the horizon. The sea glimmered like molten glass, and for the first time in a decade, neither of them felt chased by shadows. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The town welcomed the quiet stranger who had come to live by the sea. Damien worked at the harbor helping repair boats, fixing engines, mending nets. He was no longer the man who commanded armies or owned skyscrapers. He was simply a man with salt on his skin and laughter in his home. Sometimes Isla would catch him watching Eli with quiet pride, or gazing out at the horizon with a look that said he had finally made peace with the ghosts behind him. One evening as they watched the sunset together, Isla said, Do you ever miss the old life? He shook his head. This is the first one that ever felt real. She rested her head against his shoulder. Then we finally made it. He smiled. Yes. Home. The years continued gently. Seasons shifted. The world beyond their small town kept moving, wars, markets, politics. But here time flowed like the tide, predictable, healing. And sometimes when the sea was very still, Isla would swear she could see a glint of glass beneath the surface, as if her old letters still drifted there, carried endlessly from shore to shore. Each time she saw it she smiled. Because the sea had kept every promise it ever made. And so had he. Every ending hides a new beginning. And if you've journeyed this far, it means this story touched something inside you. Don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button, tap like, and share your thoughts below. Tell me, what part of this story stayed with you the most? Because here, every voice matters and every story finds its way home. I'll be waiting for you in the next chapter.